everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lucy and in today's video I'm recommending to you the best books with an enemies to lovers romance trope. Enemies to lovers, one of the best romance tropes in my opinion. I just like the tension, I like the angst, I like the build up, I like the complete change of points of view and the slowly beginning to like someone, the slow burn. I'm a big fan of all that, and I think you all might be too if you're clicking on this video. Enemies to lovers is just a very exciting romance trope. There's a lot of kind of restrained passion, and also there's a very thin line between love and hate, which a lot of these books will show exactly. If you're new to this channel, why not consider subscribing, and that way you will be part of this bookish community. You can also click that notification bell, and that way you'll get notified every time I post a video, which these days is mostly fantasy romance recommendations or some type of romance recommendations, so I hope you enjoy. So let's just crack on with the recommendations. I've got a big stack of books here, and the first one I want to recommend to you, which I think does enemies to lovers really, really well, is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This might be a very kind of predictable choice, I think. I know a lot of people love this book. I know it's so hyped, but bear with me on this. If you've not read this because you think it's just so hyped, I don't really wanna, you know, it's not gonna be worthwhile reading because everyone's read it. Everyone's read it for a reason, and most people I know love this book, including me. This does enemies to lovers really, really well. Basically, we have Jude, who is a human girl who lives in Elfheim, which is the land of elves, land of fae, and she basically is struggling to prove that she is worthy of the fairies' respect, especially Prince Cardan, who has basically singled her out as an enemy to him. He is one of the fairy princes and he hates Jude with all of his heart, and I think that's what makes this enemies to lovers part of this book so brilliantly done, because you can tell that Cardan has this weird fascination with Jude. You just don't really know why, and he sets out to hurt her, to annoy her, to anger her, and to basically test her on every single page. And Jude just fights and proves her worth. It's definitely one of those relationships where Jude really does hate him, probably a bit longer than he hates her, but that's what makes it so sweet, because by the end you can tell that he is really pining for her, and you can tell that Jude just doesn't realize it. So I would really recommend The Cruel Prince if you want a very dark, seductive, especially dark. It's quite dark in terms of the lens that Cardan goes to kind of prove that he doesn't love Jude and that he wants to get her out of his head, and eventually he realizes that he can't, and it's that moment where it just all comes together. It's just so lovely. I really would recommend The Cruel Prince and this whole series by Holly Black, because the enemies to lovers trope gets really played upon. So it's not just in this first book where we basically see a lot of betrayal. Also, there is the second book, The Wicked King, where things just go from bad to worse. Let's just say that. The kind of boundaries of the enemies to lovers trope are really tested in this series. So I really would recommend it if you fancy some enemies to lovers. Okay, the next book I really would recommend if you want some enemies to lovers goodness is The Viking Who Loves Me by Julia Quinn. This is the second book in the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn, which you probably all know about. The Bridgertons was made into a Netflix TV show, which basically became a huge, ridiculously huge success. And the book series that it's based upon is equally as good, equally as fun. And The Viking Who Loves Me, which is the second book, although I would say the books can be read individually if you just want to test the waters and you just want to try this one, you can still do that. But this book is based on Anthony Bridgerton, who is the eldest Bridgerton sibling. He is a notorious rake, and he basically has a lot of lovers and just is enjoying himself until he's forced to settle down, and he's basically on the hunt for a wife. It's there that he stumbles across the Sheffield family, and Kate Sheffield, who is the love interest in this book, basically hates him. They hate each other. They just see each other as this annoyance. But Anthony sets his sight on Kate's sister, and Kate refuses to let him put his sights on her. She does not want her sister anywhere near Anthony Bridgerton. And that's where the fun and games ensue in this book, because Kate is trying to protect her sister from Anthony's, you know, gaze, and she just doesn't want her sister to marry him because she has such a low opinion of him. However, that low opinion means that they're often put in a lot of situations together, and they end up having certain dalliances, and they end up getting married, and they may end up falling in love. This is such a good enemies to lovers because the banter is really there. I love a good back and forth between enemies, which is obviously flirting, and I just love the way that it's done in The Viscount Who Loves Me. Anthony Bridgerton is the most precious little cinnamon roll. I love him, and Kate especially is one of the best kind of heroines in the Bridgerton series. I think she is feisty, she's fun, and she just will not be pushed around. She will always speak her mind. And I just love this book. I really would recommend it. If you've never read any Julia Quinn, obviously I would suggest starting with the first book in the Bridgerton series, which is The Duke and I, but The Viscount Who Loves Me is equally as good. If you want to start there, you want to start off with some enemies to lovers, you can do that. Okay, the next book is something a little bit different. This is Captive Prince by C.S. Pacat. This is very dark and it is adult romance. So there are going to be some scenes that are quite shocking, and not only is it more kind of sexually explicit, but it is dark in other ways. There is kind of like torture, and it is basically set in a world at war. So this is about our main character Damon, who is a prince to the kingdom of Achelos. But when his half-brother basically seizes the throne and he strips Damon of all of his power and forces him to become a pleasure slave to the prince of an enemy nation, Damon is basically at the bottom of the barrel and he has to fight to get his throne back. But his new master, who is Prince Laurent, who is an heir to the throne of Via, he basically realizes that Laurent is very dangerous, very deadly, very manipulative. His life is not only at risk, but also his heart. But the thing is, Laurent doesn't know Damon's true identity, that he is heir to the kingdom of Achelos. And Laurent has his own kind of power struggles with the throne as well. So Damon is really trying to help Laurent to seize his throne. And there is just loads at play here. There is politics, there is passion, there is just deceit at every turn. If you want a true enemies to lovers romance, two rival princes from enemy nations, Captive Prince is it. I am warning you, it is a little bit dark if you're not kind of used to reading dark romance like this, but it is one of the best series I've read in the romance genre. I keep turning back to it. I think I've read it several times, and I just really love this dark, delicious, but really addictive romance series, and it does enemies to lovers very, very well. Okay, I think I found a spot where I'm not being blinded, but let's pray for this spot, guys. So the next recommendation for enemies to lovers romances is Shatter Me by Tahera Mafi. I have got Unravel Me here, which is the second book in the series, I think. Basically, I'm holding this book up because I don't own Shatter Me. The reason why I bought specifically a physical copy of Unravel Me is because I knew I'd want to reread it, because the enemies to lovers romance is just so good. So this book is a very old school booktube classic. This is basically a dystopian series about a girl called Juliet who I believe can kill with her touch, and she basically just can't touch anyone. This does contain a love triangle, so if you aren't keen on love triangles, this might not be for you, but I definitely think it does a love triangle really well, in that it is very, very clear who the end goal romance is going to be. So basically, the enemies to lovers romance in this series is between our main character Juliet and a character called Warner, who in the first book, Shatter Me, basically is the enemy of the series. He is basically a general. He kind of heads up the government regime that Juliet is fighting against. And then there is some tension, there is some romance there. She might be falling for him more than she knows. Honestly, I am Warner trash, and I haven't read the later half of the Shatter Me series yet. I do have it on my shelf behind me, but this series basically is continued, and it was continued several years after the first 3 books in the Shatter Me series came out. So I don't know how that progresses, but in the first 3 books, Warner is definitely the main kind of love interest, and Juliet and Warner definitely have this enemies to lovers dynamic going on. This book is so addictive. I remember reading each of these books in several days. I was that obsessed, and I fell in love with Warner so much. So I really would recommend this series if you want a really good dose of enemies to lovers. It's definitely YA, so there are a lot of traditional tropes if you're, you know, new to YA or you prefer reading adult romances, but I definitely think the romance is worth it. So if you really want a good dose of enemies to lovers, I would recommend the Shatter Me series. And finally, we have Crimson Bound by Rosamund Hodge. You may have seen me recommend this in several videos. Basically, I think this book is so underrated. It is YA fantasy, but it is exceptionally well written, like really well written. It is just beautiful, very lyrical. So this is a fairy tale retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, and let's just say the romance to this is chef's kiss. The enemies to lovers element especially, I think it does enemies to lovers really well. It is about a girl called Rochelle who basically has been training to fend off the world from dark magic, but then when she stumbles in the forest one day, she basically encounters something that puts her life and the world at risk. To atone for this, she has to be sworn to the king to basically protect and serve the realm. So when she is tasked with accompanying the Prince Armand, the man that she hates the most, classic enemies to lovers, she basically has to go with him on this mission to recover this sword that will basically save the world from evil. So this is a very classic fairy tale retelling, but with the enemies to lovers trope, it just basically cranks it up a notch, you know? I adored this book when I read it. I feel like I need to give it another reread because I remember it just being so beautiful, so lyrical, but also the romance is incredible. It is typical enemies to lovers where you have all that angst, you have all that kind of building tension and the banter and the back and forth. I really would recommend this if you want an enemies to lovers romance with a fantasy fairy tale kick. This will deliver all of the goods. So guys, that is it for my enemies to lovers book recommendations. I really hope you found something you liked in this video, and it would be so wonderful if you could recommend any enemies to lovers books that you've read and really liked down in the comments below. I'm obviously a very big fan of this trope, and I would love to hear your recommendations. So guys, that is it for this video. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you very soon in my next video. Bye.